Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to work with loops in R. I'm going to show you a couple different examples, and by the end of the video you'll know how to create both for loops and while loops, which are both really important types of loops to know how to work with. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is loop through numbers 1 to 10 and print a statement for each number. And we're going to do this because it's just a very simple way to create your first for loop. The structure of a for loop looks like this. So you have the word for, a pair of brackets, and a pair of curly brackets. Now, when you loop through something, you need a vector or a list or something to loop over. We're going to loop over numbers 1 through 10. So I'm going to say for I in 1 to 10. Now let's look at this for a second. We have our list of numbers. We have 1 through 10. Oops, 1 through 10. That's what it looks like in the console. So this is the vector of numbers that we're going to loop through. And then we have a very simple I variable. And in each iteration of the loop, I is going to be equal to each of these variables. So first, I will be equal to 1, then 2, so on and so forth. So this is what this statement means. You have the ticker, the I, and then you have your vector or your list of files or whatever it is that you want to loop through one by one. And then you have a pair of curly brackets. I'm going to click enter to open them up. The curly brackets is where you put the actions or the code that you want to implement for each loop. So it's basically going to change depending on the I variable. The code will be the same, but the output may be different based on your I variable. So for the first example, let's keep it extremely simple. I'm going to print, for every loop, I want to print a high statement. That's all I want to do. And let's highlight it and click run. And you'll see we now have 10 high variables because for every single loop, I printed high. Now let's also print I, the I variable. Okay, so let's highlight it and click run. And now in the console, you can see that for every single loop, we printed high, and then we printed the variable at that time. So that's a very simple example. We can also modify it, and we can do basic math using the value of I. We can do temp. We'll create a variable called temp number, and that will be equal to I plus 10. And then we can print the temp number. I will get rid of this statement here for now. I'll comment out the print I statement. And again, we can highlight it, click run. And now in the console, you can see that we have the high statements and then the I plus 10 being printed as well. So this is essentially how a loop works, and they can become complicated. You can do a loop within a loop, but this is always the basic structure of a loop. You need a for, you need a pair of curly brackets where you provide the vector that you want to loop over, and then you provide the code that you want to implement for every single loop. Now, let's do something a little bit more complicated. Say you want to loop through files that you have in your folder. Often in R, you have a bunch of CSVs that you want to work with. And something that I like to do is take all of my CSVs and combine them into one data frame. And if you want, you can do that in a loop. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay, so I want to loop through all of my CSVs and I want to combine them into one data frame. I can show you how to do this using a loop. Keep in mind that to do this, all of your CSVs have to have the exact same format. So they have to have the same number of columns, the same number of data types, the same headers. If they don't, then you can't do this in a loop because they're all different. So they have to be modified and mutated before you can combine them. But all of my CSVs are exactly the same. Each file represents a different month. So combining them should be pretty straightforward. Okay, so first I need a list of files, a list of CSVs. So I'm going to use a function called list files to make a list of all of my CSVs that are all in one folder. So let's create a variable. Let's call it CSV list. and we're going to use the list files function. In this function, you have to put a path to where the folder is where all your CSVs are saved. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So here's where all my CSVs are saved. This is the folder. I just placed it in the list files function and then I clicked run. So now, if I did this correctly, when I run the CSV list variable, you'll see here are all of my CSVs in the folder. Now, the one thing I'm going to do is create an additional argument in the list files function. I'm going to say full names equals true. And I'm going to add that inside the brackets because I want the full file path name, not just the relative name. So let's run that and then take a look at the variable again. And now you can see that instead of just having the file name, I can see the full file path, and that's what I want. So that's good. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our for loop. So we need the for statement. We're going to say I in CSV list. We're going to loop through our CSV list. And then let's keep it really simple for the first iteration. Let's just print the file name. So print I. So let's highlight that and click run. And there you go. We're able to print the file name. Now, the next thing I want to do is read the CSV, because right now we only have the file name, which is a string. It's not the actual data. So let's create a new variable, and I'm going to call it temp.csv for a temporary CSV. And I'm going to use the read.csv function to actually input the file name and then import the data. So let's do read.csv and then I, because I is the file name. And let's print the first 10 rows. So print head temp.csv. So the head statement is what you use when you only want a sample of the data being printed, not the whole, not the entire data set. So I only want the first 10 rows or the first 6 rows. So we're going to use that statement and then we're going to print it to the console. So let's highlight that, run it again, and there you go. You have the file name being printed because we said print I. So there's the file name and there is a sample of the data. So that's perfect. Now, the next question is, how do we combine everything into one data frame? The first thing we need to do is initialize an empty data frame. And we'll do that outside of the for loop. We're going to create a variable called df for data frame. And I'm going to just initialize it, which means I'm not going to put any data inside. I'm just going to set df equals null. And that's going to be my completely empty data frame. Let's run that and take a look in the console. And there's nothing there. We're just initializing a variable. So now what I want to do is add all of my CSV data one by one to that empty data frame. So what I'm going to do is in the for loop, I'm going to create the same variable df, and I'm going to add my CSV data to my df variable using a function called rbind. Rbind means row bind. So I'm going to take all the rows and stack them on top of each other. So CSV1, CSV2, CSV3, CSV4, so on and so forth. They're all going to be stacked together one by one as we're going through the loop. So let's use rbind. And I want to rbind df and my temporary CSV. So let me break this down again. We have an empty variable called df. In the loop, I want to continue adding to the df variable. And what I want to do is take my CSV data and row bind it, so all the rows get attached to all the rows, so on and so forth, as we're going through the loop. So let's run this. I'm going to actually comment out the print statement here. We're going to highlight it, and we're going to run it. Okay, so something happened to the loop. We were able to go through the loop, and we have a single print statement, so I know that it was successfully going through each loop because the print statement was printing every single time. Let's take a look at the df data frame. And here you go. All the data was combined into a single data frame. And I know that the CSVs were added one by one because if you look at the x variable here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, and then it starts again. So that 1 to 88 was from that first CSV. The next section is from the second CSV. So you can see that they were all being added to the data frame one by one. Now, this is why you need to initialize the data frame outside of the loop and then add to it inside the loop, so that you can continuously update a single data frame. So that's how you can combine all of your CSVs into a single data frame using a loop. Okay, so the last thing we're going to look at is a while loop. It's very similar to a for loop, but basically you tell the loop that you have a condition and you want the loop to end when that condition is met. So let's dig right into it so that you know what I mean. We are going to create a new variable called b, and I'm going to set b equal to 1. Let me just create a little title here. Okay, so I have a variable called b, and I want the loop to keep going as long as b is less than 10. The second b becomes greater than 10, I want the loop to stop. So this is different from a for loop, because for a for loop, you have a strict vector or atomic list, and as long as you're going from beginning to end, you're happy. You know when the beginning is and you know when the end is. With a while loop, you may not be as certain. Maybe you're doing some sort of modeling work and you're not sure when the value will exceed a certain threshold. That's when you want to use a while loop. So let's build our loop. The structure of a while loop is very similar to the structure of a for loop. You have the word while instead of for. You have curly brackets, and then you have curved brackets, and then you have curly brackets. Okay, so the condition that we want is that as long as b is, I only want the loop to run while b is less than 10. So b less than 10, that's the condition. And as long as b is less than 10, I want you to print b, and then I want you to update b by adding 1 to it. Now this is important because if you're not updating your iterator or your b value, it's going to run forever, because I set b equal to 1, and if I'm not updating it, b will always be equal to 1, and then the while loop will never end because it's just going to be 1 forever. So now what I'm doing here is inside the loop, I'm updating b by 1 so that it's steadily increasing, and that way our loop will end at some point, which is what I want. So while b is less than 10, I want you to print out the value of b, and then I want you to update the value of b by 1. So that's what's going on here. So let's initialize the b value, and then we can run our while loop, and there you go. So you'll see that the last value of b is 9, which makes sense because as soon as b became 10, the loop stopped. So here, I'm guessing that b was equal to 9. We updated it. 9 plus 1 is 10, obviously, and that means that our threshold was passed, and that way the loop stopped. So that's how you create a while loop. Okay, so those are 3 simple examples on how to create loops in an R environment. If you want to see something more complex, or if you want to see a certain type of example, let me know and I can make a video for that. And if you're interested in doing a live R programming workshop, I have a link below, and you can register. It's a small class, and that allows you to ask me questions, and we work through examples together. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to check it out. And good luck, and thanks for watching.